Businesses, they mustn't be lulled into a false sense of security. You know, the government's going to take care of all the problems. There's no downside here.
Yeah, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah.
Like I said yesterday, Donald Trump said, I'm going to give everybody $1,200. I'm definitely going to take the $1,200. Don't make it a question. However, what does that really do for us long term? That's questionable.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest thing, and probably the most important thing, that all of us need to focus on is the governments around the world, U.S. here, across Europe, have taken quite a strident approach to restoring the economy and getting things back going. Our real problem is you couldn't do this twice in the next 10 years. We got another one of these. It really would, you know, and then of course, you know, if we had another one of the, and it's quite conceivable we could have another one of these. And in terms of bioterrorism, the world's just beginning to figure out that, you know, it wouldn't be all that hard to do this. You know, you could cull half the population of the earth without a great deal of effort.
Yeah.
Forget about all the military efforts. Forget about all the about everything else. Forget about how much the U.S. and U.K. spend on defense. You know, forget about all the missile programs and the weapons and everything else. You know, one of these could do 100 times worse damage than any of the big weapon systems could do. He said, I'm in the front lines. He said, I do this 12 hours a day. He said, wash your hands, don't touch your face. In China, there's not that much hand soap made for 1.4 billion people.
Yeah.
How could you not have this thing transmitting?
Yeah. Mike, let's kick off. If you could do the introduction, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Stewart, and I've been involved in troubled businesses and fixing them for quite a few years now. COVID-19 is undoubtedly a very serious challenge, but we believe that the resulting business and economic problems could actually be far bigger. So today, we're going to discuss the topic of the effectiveness of the government's introduction of subsidized furloughing, and the title of our talk is furloughing employees a fudge or a solution? And the panel consists of a group of people, and I'm going to ask Tom to actually introduce them. And our aim is that we run this for about 30 minutes. We're not rigid on that, but that's the kind of indicative length we're looking at. So Tom, if I could just hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tom Pickering. My team have led 200 company turnarounds over the last 15 years. So we've got a pretty interesting perspective on crisis management and the sort of root causes of that, which I'll share. There's David McLean, who's on the call, who's former soldier, Royal Marine, who's expert and run a very large organisation around the psychology of these types of situations and how to get that right. And David Allen is our special guest today, who's got a very interesting background from, is a US citizen, very interesting technology, entrepreneurial background. So David's kindly agreed to join us today to share his view of how he sees the world. So David, if I could just David Allen, if I could just hand over to you. You know, if you could just introduce yourself briefly, tell us about, you know, the scale of the challenge and the nature of the challenge as you see it, and then if you could touch on the key topic, which is around furloughing employees. Is it a solution or is it a fudge? So I'd like to look at both sides of that argument. Then we'll ask some questions, and if at any stage any of the attendees would like to ask any questions, please do so on the chat, and we'll try to include those as well. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I am an American citizen, and you can tell that as soon as I open my mouth. But I'm also a British citizen. So I've been a citizen here for 25 years. I've lived here for 35 years. And I'm primarily, my whole background has been in the tech business. I've helped start and develop a bunch of companies here. Probably the most distinctive of which you've heard of in 1994. I think I was the fourth employee here in the UK of a little American router startup called Cisco Systems. We grew pretty big, so that was fairly successful. And I've been through 3 NASDAQ IPOs and helped start a bunch of companies over the years. And I do spend part of my time in America and part of my time here, and been through most of the major ups and downs in the tech business, which have been sort of the same ups and downs as the general business. I'm amazed that so many people are looking at what's going on right now as if this is just some sort of speed bump in the economy. In some speed, everything's just going to go back to normal, and I do believe that nothing is going to go back to normal. That what was normal 4 weeks ago is never going to be normal again. So we've all got to change to figure out how to best work with that. And so the issue of furloughing is really one issue among a whole bunch of issues that we're all going to have to go through, live through, and be part of. And so the furloughing, I can see good things and I can see some bad things on it. So, but if the bad thing would be is if you think that what we've done is just gone over a speed bump and everything's going to return back to normal, that's probably not going to happen. So how's that, Tom?
Yeah, it's good. So in terms of the scale of impact on the economy, David, and the industries, you commented on, tech businesses, retail, some of the impact, and also the impact on the economy. You mentioned a figure of around 40% on the global economy when I sort of started pre-US at 24%. What's your thoughts in terms of the big picture impact?
Well, I think for you obviously you've got the big picture. I mean, if you stop and say what would happen if we all had to maintain 2 meters of distance between us going forward, if that was the standard going forward, basically there's nothing in our infrastructure that has prepared us to do that. Airplanes aren't configured that way. Buses aren't. Trains aren't. So the question is, how are you going to cope with that? The scale of the problem is so large, you couldn't just scrap everything and say, okay, we'll just sit here and wait till British Airways refits 274 aircraft. This is not going to happen. Plus, the econometric model for all of transportation changes dramatically because, if you take a 787 and leave Heathrow and go to New York, it's going to cost there or thereabouts £250,000 in fuel to send that plane there. So what are you going to charge every passenger £2,000 to sit in a little economy seat to go there? It's going to be hard to do. Same thing with trains, same thing with buses. The entire transportation infrastructure is going to have to change. The hotel infrastructure, restaurants. Certainly in America, every restaurant is made to cram people in. It's just pretty much the case here as well. So anything that involves the association of people to use something, whether it's transportation, eating, whatever, all those things have to change because it's quite possible that we could have another one of these, and this could go on for 6 months easily. And nobody wants to take any risks. So the whole country is quite risk averse, from that perspective. So those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. Good. So, and in terms of the impact on the US economy, what would you say is the impact on the US economy at the moment in terms of drop in GDP?
Well, I think the drop in the U.S. economy is going to be far worse than it is here. And for the same reasons that the U.S. economy has essentially become the epicenter for Corona. Because in America, you got not a country, you've got 50 separate countries because each state really operates quite separately. And President Trump can tell everybody to stay home, and all 50 governors have to endorse that, or else it doesn't go anywhere. And in fact, the governor of Florida only a week ago Saturday said, "Hey, everybody's got to stay home." He didn't put any lockdown order in place. And surprise, surprise, Florida is on fire for corona. I mean, it's just happening left, right, and center. So at one level, if you want to generate herd immunity, the U.S. would be the place to do it, because the government can stand back and say, okay, because Americans are really big on their rights. It's my constitutional rights. I can do this and do that. And at one level, the government can stand back and say, okay, you got your constitutional rights. Go meet, go do whatever you want. You're all going to die, but go ahead and do it. And you'll have no industry, because there won't be any workers. There won't be any people to do it. So from one perspective, the U.S. economy could develop the herd immunity very quickly. But they're talking about a 30 or 31% drop in GDP. It's probably much closer to 40%. And a 40% drop in GDP is not something we've ever seen in our lifetimes. We haven't seen anything like this ever. I'll tell you how old I am. I was born 9 years after World War II. And when I was born, when I was growing up in the 50s, we still had, all the sort of food rationing that you had here and everything else. It was fairly dire, because, Britain got attacked, but so did the U.S. and Pearl Harbor. We lost a lot of people. And, we were all fighting for our lives. Well, and we haven't seen anything since then like this. There's no, it was just like this, or it was just like that. There's nothing that compares to this.
Yeah.
And so therefore, we've got to think very carefully what's the next step, and where are the opportunities, because there's clearly great opportunity here.
Yeah. So what about tech, David? What's your view in terms of tech, the impact on some of the tech investment in Silicon Valley? What do you think the response has been there?
Well, there's a bunch of businesses that are really going to suffer. The fashion business is really going to take it to the shorts. Why? Because people are standing home going, why do I have these 47 suits? I'm not wearing suits anymore. What's with all these shirts? So what I need 27 pairs of shoes for? Don't ask my wife that question, of course, but she'll tell me why I need those, or why she needs those. But that's 127 pairs of shoes. But all that aside, sorry, ladies, if you're listening. No offense intended. But the truth is, we're all looking at, well, what do we need all this stuff for? And it turns out, we're all learning to work at home and work remotely. And you start asking yourself, why are we actually doing this? What are we actually doing this for? What are we accomplishing? Because in the IT business, people are actually way more productive working at home than they are going into some big office. A close friend of mine I was talking to over the weekend is with KPMG in London, and he said their productivity is going through the roof, because you don't waste any time commuting. There's no hour and a half each way. I mean, that's rubbish. Forget it. So people are becoming the knowledge workers are becoming more independent. And certainly the tech business itself, the things that have generated incredible value and are, companies that are very highly valued, a lot of those are going to probably come down. They're going to go through the floor. But if you take a look at the companies like Google and Apple that are associating with NHSX, the National Health Services app development team, they're going to bring apps, track and trace apps like they have in China to help people who've got the coronavirus. They're going to bring that online very, very quickly. And we're seeing tangible evidence of things happening positively that we've never seen in our history. I mean, 2 months ago, if you asked anyone in the United Kingdom, could you build a 4,000-bed hospital in 2 weeks? 1% of the people would say, I suppose it's mathematically possible, but Britain, do they? Not a possibility. Guess what? They did in 2 weeks. They're doing the same thing with apps. They're doing the same thing with all kinds of things. So I think people are rearranging their thinking in terms of what actually can be done.
Great, that's fantastic. So, David McLean, what are your thoughts in terms of any comments on what David said and any observations?
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Thank you, David. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, also former Royal Marine, but I'm a senior psychotherapist now for quite a few years, so I'm interested in people, and I'm interested in how the foundations of everything, of course, foundations of business, is the people that are within that, and what's the kind of the wider psychological and philosophical, actually, importantly, impact of this. And it's interesting what you were saying there, David, about the materialism. Of course, retail therapy, the dopamine fix, and people do these things to feel good. So actually, again, if you look at the wider picture, from the positive side of things, what else are people doing to feel good? What is it that people are doing? Because we all need to feel good, we all want to feel good, and actually there's kind of a reset there to an extent. Exercise, running, obviously you mentioned quite a bit there, Tom, the amount of cycling that you're doing, something that you enjoy and something that you're doing more of. The exercise, the amount of people, I don't know if you see, I live in central London, and the amount of people that are out running who plainly aren't usually running, but it's fantastic. It's a great thing to see. It really is a great thing to see, because people are doing what's necessary to feel good, and that isn't retail therapy. So yeah, I tend to agree with you there, David. But it's the uncertainty as well, and it's the mental health of individuals. Thoughts create feelings, feelings create actions, and actions produce results. That's one of my favourite sayings that I bring out quite often. And it is the thought of the individual that will make them feel in a specific way, good or bad, and will make them either act or not act, or act out of fear or act irrationally. And of course, we're in the wider question here, Furlough, in business, are they going to act rationally or irrationally within their business and make the right choices? Are they paralysed by the fear in terms of the media, etc., and how this is going to have an impact as things move on? So yeah, a few questions, a few statements kind of mixed in there, but that's what's on my mind, and that's what I feel is very important.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. I think some of my observations are from a company turnaround perspective is that some of the labels, for example, COVID-19 interruption scheme, actually these challenges have got very little to do with COVID-19, which sounds like quite a harsh comment, but these issues were there. They just became unsustainable. I think some of the issues around identifying these things, around being blinded, people are making statements like, we can't predict the future when we get through this, as if it's going to be normal at the other side. I think on a positive side as well, from the furloughing perspective, there's a much more of a heart for people here. So the homeless have been rehoused. I think there's still a question mark over those people still being a bit marginalised from the group. And I think furloughing is okay if there's a short gap, but if and it goes back to a present. So as David sort of said, if it's a bump in the road rather than a precipice, and it all makes sense. I think the other thing as well, it's certainly not a time for sycophants. It's very much a time for open dialogue and clarity, and that's certainly something that, David, you rightly challenged me on pretty directly, and I think it's absolutely critical. It's also time to listen to the outspoken as well, I think, who are probably saying things that we don't want to hear. I think on the other side of it, on COVID-19, I think there's these issues were here. A lot of businesses are on the verge of running out of cash. There's some big question marks over tech investment, I think, where quite a few of the tech businesses people haven't been asking the question they should do in terms of gross margin and viability. And the tech VCs are expecting to have more money from the government, which is quite bizarre. When in fact they could probably fund quite a few of these themselves out of their own pockets. So I think there's a danger with this, that there's a sort of expectation and a norm that's created that the government will fix, and they're the fallback position. This money as well does need to be paid back. So, it's pushing it back on the government eventually does have to be pushed back. I think as well there's some real impacts on the impact of remote working on people, which is around, well, from a psychological perspective, as individuals, where most of our thoughts that come into our heads are wrong, which is a bit stark. And we prefer to be left alone and do our own thing, which is actually perfect. So we can, but the danger of that is that we also need to hold each other to account. And that's why dialogue and face-to-face communication is so important. And I've sort of noticed in some of the dialogue I've been having with people that actually people are becoming more polarized. And so I might be becoming more of a turnaround guy, which is my background, and some people are becoming more intellectual, and that gap is actually becoming more difficult to bridge. And I think the challenge as well with that is that there's maintaining relationships is becoming more difficult, I think, in this sort of utopian remote working situation. And what worries me is that people are quite adaptable, and bit by bit, like our hair growing, we get used to this and start believing our own truths, which is not a healthy time. So I think the sort of headlines is that we must do something different, otherwise a hideous denial of this situation. I think there's a challenge with self-reliance as well. So our crutch has been largely taken away from a personal and a business perspective. And I think it's critical that teams are once again remotivated to check decisions. And the question as well is who actually is qualified to make decisions, and how can we create certainty and redefine our plan? Certainly, the turnaround is all about creating a plan and delivering a plan. And actually, you can do that internally, even though it's on a piece of paper, and you can start executing that. And I think some of the simple triggers, if things don't sound right, they probably aren't. I think there's another challenge, which is we're not all in it together, because some people are doing very well out of this and other people are really being marginalised. And I think at the end of the day, all furloughing does is it creates time. Cash creates time in the turnaround world. And the challenge is, how do we use that time? So in summary, I think these are the learning points from our experience from turnaround, is that first and foremost, robust team. To check decision making, to value people, to value uniqueness, value uniqueness, to make people feel included and understood. Really important. There's a danger that we revert to type, as I mentioned before. We've got a huge variety of different perspectives here. I think as well, relationships really matter. I think there's quite a few businesses which have lost their purpose, and we need to get back to caring about what we're doing. And if you go back to Socrates, there's even in Socrates' time, people were highly reliant on local collaboration and regional collaboration. So this isn't anything new. And I think we must value honesty and integrity and value imperfection and understand where people are coming from in this. So I think there's one indestructible emotion which I think is a bit counterintuitive, but it's called love, and it's actually what holds things together. And in a business context, what does that mean? I think this is part one of the Winning Thinking program. It's actually an odd challenge, which is a bit counterintuitive, which is actually putting other people first, right? Which sounds like exactly the opposite thing to do, but actually it holds things together, because what that does is everybody behaves like the boss. If I put my team first, which is what we've done as a turnaround team, then if people start putting me first, and that's great. That's really good, and that's self-fulfilling. And so the challenge is when things get tough, we lose sight of that, and it all becomes about us, and that's when things rapidly start falling to pieces. So I think in a nutshell, it's all about love and people, and we can't lose sight of that. And I think there's some truths that have been redefined, which also need to be challenged as well, very openly, in David Allen's sort of anti-sycophantic type way to get to the truth, which I think is one of the casualties of having it too good for too long. One of the things that's come out. So that'd be my contribution. So any comments on that?
So two questions that have came. One's just come in. One from Calvin. I don't know if you can read that one there. His point. Yeah. I don't know if you've read Calvin.
Want to read that, David?
Directed at, but
it relates to other, not pandemics, but epidemics. and the fact that in Asia there was SARS, which is quite a recent one. Calvin also mentions the HIV/AIDS scourge in Africa, which was a major problem in Africa.
Yeah.
No doubt about that, and it's still influencing what's going on with COVID-19, because people die of tuberculosis and hepatitis and so on when you are HIV positive.
Yeah. So let's just have a look at other questions. Who's been, David, did you look, it's very Western that COVID-19 has happened in living memory.
If you scroll down to Charles Hain, Charles is asking, in an age of love and people, what's the one thing an HR director should be doing in a big company right now?
Yeah, I think I'd respond to that by saying, effectively, there are two things, I think. One is to develop the skills to actually identify what actually got us into this mess. So I talked about some of the things which, the sorts of statements that are made, like, we can't get through this, or when we get through this. Now, it's not that that's right or wrong, it's just that type of statement. And what that statement does is it creates stasis and paralysis. And that's a bit of psychology. And, and if the boss says that, then everybody follows that. So there's some basic skills that the Winning Thinking program actually pulls out to enable people to cope with this sort of situation, because this is actually why we got ourselves into the mess in the first place, because of these norms and/or things like around technology. People have used the word disruptive technology, and that's normalized a lot of the tech industry, when in fact a lot of these businesses are frankly senseless, and the investment models have been senseless. So now is the time to ask tough questions. I think as well we ought to just kibosh this thing about not having difficult discussions as well. We ought to really encourage people to be themselves. But it's all about developing teams to create an environment which is healthy, that actually accepts people the way they are, encourages pretty open, frank communication without being disrespectful, but also to really develop empathy between us, because as David knows, as a soldier, it's empathy that actually holds times together when things get tough, and relationships, they're practical things like sense of humour, which appropriate sense of humour is really important.
Tom, Calvin is also making that point in an observation he makes, that the physical distancing is creating a problem, and that's the point that you're just making right now, that it's going to be difficult to develop empathy when we are just communicating like this.
Yeah, that's a big problem. I think that's a really critical issue. So I think there's a real big problem. I think there's a really big problem with home working. Everybody's talking up and thinking it's great. It's a really big problem. What worries me is like a hair growing, bit by bit by bit, we don't see this shift. We've become more polarized. We've got to get much closer to each other. It's all about relationships. It's all about people to people relationships.
I think that in response to Charles's question about being an HR director, I find it very interesting to take a look at some segments, and obviously because of the way the NHS works. I have a close friend who's she was a nurse in a very, very nice position in Frimley Park Hospital, and Frimley Park is in the south of England, one of the largest hospitals. It's one of the largest hospitals in the UK. It's a massive place, and they own like 6 other hospitals. And she had a really nice job, and so she put it quite succinctly. She said, "If you are a registered nurse and you are working for the NHS, you are now an ICU nurse." So it was, if you want to be working here, and they just were very specific. If you don't want to work here, if you don't like that, that's okay. You can go find something else. But you'll find that there are 2 jobs available if you're a registered nurse in the NHS. You can be an ICU nurse, and you can be an ICU nurse. And that's pretty much it. And I think that that's sort of the attitude that almost every company is going to have to adopt. You're going to have to say, well, what are we trying to do here? Let's strip everything else that doesn't actually matter, and let's get to what does actually matter. Because in the NHS, there is no agenda for anything other than dealing with COVID right now.
Yeah.
And that's going to apply to just about every company that we see out there. Everyone's going to have to come together and say, this is not a speed bump. We're going off a cliff here, and we got to all pull together to do something. And, to David M's point, it's all about the feeling and trust and, how that works.
Yeah, I think just there's another point on Charles's comment, which is really important. I think it's about the message. So this thing around 20% mandatory salary reduction without context is really quite disturbing. We talked about this on a previous call. There's a need to move on all fronts in a company turnaround in a very imperfect way, and to communicate in a very open way right from the word go, and to develop trust. So, and fragmented piece of information without the big picture, like your salary is being reduced by 20%, is frankly very unhelpful. And I think, to be honest, I had trained quite a few HR directors through the winning thinking process, and they are by far the least unaware and least experienced leaders that in an organisation. They tend to be very technical, tragically. So I think relying on HR, they just I've come across one or two HR directors who've got a lot of scars on their back, but they've actually led big teams and led big organisations. But HR are definitely not the right place to look. So I think the point's well made, Charles. It's a serious problem. And I think the other question is who actually, everyone's talking about great leadership skills, but who the hell are these people? Show me one.
Could I just come in? There's a question from Martin Zeman as well, specifically for you, David. He's asked, where do you see the business opportunities in this crisis, particularly maybe the less obvious ones?
Good question. I think that I see that from a couple perspectives. At one level, I would answer the HR director says, what are you going to tell people that they've got a 20% salary reduction? I would stop and say, now, you have a salary, right? Because a huge chunk of the economy isn't going to have a salary, isn't going to be here. Their companies aren't going to be here. I mean, if you just take a look at the major retailers, you look at Debenhams and all these other companies, most of them aren't good. When we come back out of this in 3-4 weeks' time, they're either all in administration or the government's going to pony up a shocking amount of money, which they don't have and probably won't do. So, I mean, you're going to have a bunch of people in situations like that. So where are the opportunities? And clearly, from my perspective, the tech business has a whole new set of opportunities of providing people data and things that were unthinkable before, of having your location tracked so that you could tell people if you've got COVID or if you are near anybody with COVID. The British public is very, very sensitive to the sort of 1984 concept of from George Orwell of people knowing what I'm thinking, know what I'm doing. America's even more sensitive to it. But for the first time, people are willing to trade that away in very simple terms too. So I think there's a great opportunity in those sorts of technologies, because if it comes to whether I have my rights of privacy, or privacy as they say, or dying, I'll try to give away the privacy part and go from there. So I think that there's going to be huge opportunity in how you reconfigure the process of people. We still have to transport people. Obviously, in America, it's real different because everybody owns a car, and unless you're in New York or maybe Washington or Philadelphia, but 95% of America, they drive everywhere. Well, in Great Britain, 20% of the people drive. So we have an endemic problem here, and that if you're going to move people around, how do you do that? And I think there's a great deal to be done there, and that's going to take a lot of creative thinking.
I think from a company turnaround, Mike and I were talking about establishing a pot of money to do some distressed investments. The most difficult turnarounds are always when there's a soft top line. There are lots of good businesses that, when the sales are falling, actually are very difficult to turn around with there is a way of doing it. It's very, very difficult. It's all around psychology. It's around the basics of people not appreciating their core business and giving away. So I think there's a couple of the antithesis, I think, Calvin, of some of the questions is the answer is not to give away services. And, I think that people have got to start making money. There are a lot of tech businesses which think it's clever to be disruptive and give things away. We've got to start making money. We've got to start making money for ourselves, the government, to put this situation back together. And it's, I think some of the radical thinking is, if you take the cost of a T-shirt, buying it for 10 quid, it probably costs the planet 20 quid. And we don't, as we were saying before, David said about consumption and fashion and all that stuff. We probably don't, I haven't bought a shirt for 10 years because I've got so many shirts when you get to a certain age. So I think there are those sorts of challenges in terms of resetting margins, getting back to basics, resetting business models, because the turnaround is always about cutting the business back to the defendable core, but you need to define the defendable core, but we should take that for granted. So that's really maybe that's helpful as well. Any other thoughts, David McLean?
No, I'm happy at that point. Thank you.
Great. Dave Allen, anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's good.
Fantastic.
I think we made a lot of good points here.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you very much, David Allen, for your contribution. It's really appreciated. I think your perspective from the US and your clarity is very refreshing, so thanks for that. So Mike, would you like to just sort of try and wrap up some of the main points that we've covered, please?
Yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out there. It's interesting to hear the discussions about what the opportunities were. And I've been also exercising my mind on trying to find the winners and losers. But I think the key thing is what Tom said, is that we will need to take a lot of counterintuitive action. And that means that we will find new opportunities in new places. It's very interesting. I was reading a Financial Times article this morning. The auditors are already arguing with directors about the whole going concern issue in companies. And they've flagged up retail, hospitality, and construction as being particularly critical at the moment. So, there's just three that the auditors are already starting to get quite leery of. There was a lot said about the issue of people, and I love David's, it's not an analogy, his model of thoughts, feelings, and then actions, because this is a dynamic that in business leadership you've got to be constantly aware of. The issue of teams is going to be fundamental to getting out of this and balancing this issue of how do we work from home and how do we create teams which need to work together physically. So I think there's a lot of food for thought there. And a special thanks to David for joining us, and also thanks to Tom and David McLean.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us, guys, as well. Thanks for your questions, and feel free to come back and enjoy the same sort of banter next week. And if anybody would like to join the panel, they're very welcome, or if anybody would like to suggest. So many thanks for your contributions and questions.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Good. Hey, thanks for inviting me to be part of it. I'll see you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks. Cheers.